Hello guys, this is a full guide on how to make a full stack React application. We're gonna use multiple technologies like React, Node.js, Docker, Postgres and Prisma. The app contains multiple features such as authentication, interaction between the users, dark and light mode and Crud functionality. On the right side you can see a preview of the application. You can see how I logged in, I can see my stats, and in this particular account I'm patient. You can see the graphs and all my information. Now before we start, let's dive deeper into the application. Of course you can get the full scope of the application in the description below. Now let's continue with the user submenu. You can see the user submenu here. Let's create a new folder in the source directory. Let's call it hooks and we will create a new file, the clickoutside.jsx. Here we will define a new hook. The hook will allow us to detect a click outside of a particular DOM element. Now let's go to the page layout and import the hook. Here I will define the user submenu state. Now let's create a function that will toggle the user submenu and let's call the hook. On click I will call the function and I will define a new reference. Now let's create the user submenu. On click I will do stop propagation and I will show different styles depending on the submenu state. I will display some basic information and I will put a link to the settings page. And of course we need a button for the logout. Now let's go to the navbar.module.scss file and here we will define the new styling. Here you can see the results. If you click sign out you can see we're logging out of the application. Now let's log in back to the application. In the second chapter we will create the message component and the statistics component. Let's create a new folder. We will call it home and I will create a new file message.jsx and a styling file for the component. Of course we're gonna need a statistics component too and the styling file. Let's start with the message component. Here I will import some icons and the styling. and I will use the first name and the refetch function as properties. Let's define our classes and our HTML. And now let's define our styling. Now in the pages folder, let's create a folder with the name patient, and here we will only put the pages for the patients. Let's move the home page to the patient folder, and now let's import it to the app.jsx file. Of course, we need to define the routing too. Here you can see the date of the account, and now let's import the message. Let's define some default properties. And now let's pass the first name to the message component. Let's continue with the statistics component. I will import the styles, some icons and the loading spinner. And I will define some properties. First, we will create the hard rate table. Now I will create the temperature table. And finally the blood pressure table. Now let's define the styling for the tables. And finally, we're gonna define some default properties for all the parameters. Now let's import the statistics component to the home page, and I will put it under the message component. And here you can see the result. In this section, we're gonna create the information components. Let's create a new page in the patient folder, and I will name it information. Let's create the basic files, the .jsx and the styling file, and of course the index file too to export the component. Let's import the information page to the app.jsx file. And let's define our route. Here you can see I can access the information page and go back to the home page too. Let's create a new component, we will call it table. And the basic files too. I will rename the folder to information. Let's create the table SCSS file and an item JSX component. Of course, we're gonna need the item.scss file. We're gonna need the site title.jsx file too and the styling file. Now let's create our index file and export default from table. First of all, let's create our site title. We're gonna need two properties, the icon property and the children property. Let's import used theme from our context, and we can access our mode. Depending on our mode, we will render different styles. Let's define those. And we're done with this component. Let's import the styles for the table, the site title and the item components. I will import the button component and some icons. The table needs the URL, the title icon, the title, the items, and the instructor properties. Now let's go to the item component, and we need the date, the value, the unit, and the unit color. Let's import our styles, and let's create the component. Now let's create the styling for the item. And we're done. Finally, go to the information.jsx file and import the table. Now let's go back to our table component, and here I will define our class names. We're gonna use our site title component, and I will pass the title icon to the icon property. If the instructor boolean is true, I will style the items differently. If we do not have items, I will show no data available, and I will render different buttons depending on the user role. Now let's define default properties. And here we can see the result. Now let's go to the table.module.scss file to create our styling. Go to the information page and let's add our styles there too. I will render 3 tables and I will change the properties. And here you can see the full page. Now let's extend our Prisma schema with our patients information. Let's define our heart rate model, our temperature model, and the blood pressure model. I will create a measurements model too, and I will include the other models. And of course I will link it to the user. Now let's edit our set function, and I will create a measurement table and link it to the user. Here in the Prisma Studio you can see the measurements. Now let's create our Crud API. Go to the patient services and create a new folder and name it measurement services. Here I will create a JavaScript file for each measurement. Go to the heart rate service, import Prisma, and first we will define the post heart rate function. First of all, I will search for the right measurement table. I will create a heart rate and link it to the found table. Now let's create a get function. A delete function, and export those. Now we will create a measurement controller JavaScript file, and here I will import all the services. Go to the routes, import the router and the controller. And for the validation we will create some schemas. We're gonna use Zod to create the schemas. And now we can import it to the page in routes. Now we're able to define all the routes. Finally, go to the server.js file and import the patient routes. In the post1 application, we can test all the endpoints. Here I have an error. Let's fix the typo. And now we're able to test successfully all the routes. Of course, we need to do the same for the temperature and the blood pressure endpoints. Now let's go back to our front end and fetch the data. Go to the queries folder and we will create a measurement queries.js file. Import query client Axios use mutation and use query, and I will define a measurements key. Let's create our get measurement function. We will use Axios to fetch the data, and I will create a custom hook which it will call the use query function from the React query package. Of course, we're gonna do the same for the post measurement and the delete measurement functions. Let's create a new page and we will call it measurement. Now create the JSX file, the style file and the index file. Import it to the app and we will define the route. Now import the queries and some components from the Tanstack React table. In the React table documents you can see how to use all those different components. There are some examples you can use and test things quickly. Import the global spinner and the button too. we will get the measurement name from the parameters of the URL. And we're gonna pass the measurement to the useGetMeasurement hook. Let's create some dummy data inside the Prisma Studio. And in the React Query Dev Tools, you can see the heart rates. Now let's use the delete query. Now let's start creating our table. I'm gonna render all the fields. And below we're gonna render the values. Now let's define our styles. And here you can see the final component. Of course, we can refetch the data too. Now let's create our model so we can post new data. Import the styling and the model from React-Modal and an icon. We will render different inputs depending on the measurement. For example, blood pressure requires both systolic and diastolic fields. We need the measurement. The model is open boolean. The set is open function as properties. Let's define a state for our inputs. And we're gonna pass those properties to the model component. Now let's import the post model to the measurement page. And let's define the styling. Here you can see the model. You can see the measurement inputs. Let's create a submit and a cancel button. And below them you can see the error from the server. Now let's post some data to test the component. And we can see it's successful. Now let's create an endpoint to get some home data. Go to the API. Then services, then account services, and create a new file. We will call it homestatsservice.js. Let's import Prisma, and now let's define our function. We will search the user, and if the user role is patient, we're gonna fetch some data. And we can define which data will retrieve in the select property. Now I will return the all stats variable, and below that we can define doctor's case. Now let's export the service, and we will import it to the account controller. And finally we need to create the root. Now let's go to our front end and let's create our new query, the get home stats query. Now in the home page we will call our custom query. In the React Dev Tools you can see all the measurements. Now we are able to pass those measurements to our components. And here you can see everything is working. Now let's pass our refetch function to the refetch prop on the message component. And on click we can refetch the data. Import the query to the information page too. And now we're able to pass the data to the tables too.